The moment I stepped into Caleb and Eliza's home, I could feel the shift in the air. The unspoken tension, the polite smiles stretched just a little too tight. Still, I told myself it was just new parent stress. I'd brought a small stuffed lamb, soft as clouds, wrapped in silver paper for little Noah. I couldn't wait to hold him in my arms, to breathe in that sweet baby scent and hum the lullabies I once sang to Caleb. Eliza sat on the couch, Noah cradled against her chest. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles beneath her eyes betraying sleepless nights. Caleb hovered nearby, looking torn between wanting to help and not knowing how. I smiled, heart swelling with pride and tenderness, and took a cautious step forward. "May I?" I asked, my voice soft, barely above a whisper. For a fraction of a second, I saw something in Eliza's eyes. Fear, maybe, or resentment. It was gone so quickly I almost doubted it was ever there. But her body tensed, and she clutched Noah closer to her chest. Then came the words I never thought I'd hear. Words that cracked something deep inside me. "Don't touch my baby, not our baby, my baby," as if I was a stranger in their lives. A hush fell over the room. Even Caleb seemed unsure what to say. I stood there, the lamb toy dangling from my fingertips, unsure whether to drop it, to place it somewhere, or to simply vanish. My smile faltered, and for a moment I thought I might cry, but instead I took a breath, nodded once, and turned away. Without saying another word, I set the toy carefully on the coffee table, beside a stack of unopened mail. My feet felt heavy as I walked toward the door, the weight of years of love, sacrifice, and dreams pressing down on my shoulders. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even close it hard. I just pulled it shut behind me with a soft click, leaving my heart somewhere inside that house. As I stepped into the cool evening air, the world around me seemed blurred at the edges, as if I'd been dropped into a different life without warning. I heard the distant hum of traffic, the rustling of dry leaves skittering along the sidewalk, the muffled sound of a baby's tiny wail through the window. I wanted to believe it didn't mean anything, that Eliza was tired, that her words were a fluke, that by tomorrow things would be back to normal. But deep down, a heavier truth settled over me. Something had changed, maybe for good. I made my way down the front steps, gripping the railing for support, my mind blank and buzzing all at once. At the bottom, I paused and looked back one last time. Through the front window, I saw them. Eliza rocking Noah fiercely, Caleb standing stiffly nearby, neither of them glancing toward the door where I had just disappeared. I turned and walked toward my car, the night swallowing me up. Tomorrow would come, but nothing would be the same. Insert this line now per your instruction. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Walters. For most of my life, I believed in the power of love, the kind you stitch into every meal, every bedtime story, every scraped knee bandaged with trembling hands. I grew up in a small Ohio town where everyone knew your name and your business, but they also knew who would show up when you needed a hand. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was honest, and it taught me that family meant everything. When Caleb was born, that belief deepened into something sacred. He was a wide-eyed, stubborn little boy who hated peas and loved dinosaurs. I raised him alone after my husband Richard passed away unexpectedly when Caleb was just 5. Those were hard years, long days teaching at the local elementary school, longer nights grading papers with one hand while holding Caleb with the other. But they were full of moments I wouldn't trade for anything. Birthday cakes that leaned a little to the left, late-night talks about monsters under the bed, endless games of catch in our backyard until the fireflies came out. When Caleb grew up and graduated from college, I remember standing in the audience, clapping so hard my hands stung. I thought, we made it, you and me. And when he brought Eliza home for the first time, I was nothing but welcoming. She was young, smart, and spirited. A bit guarded, maybe, but I chalked that up to nerves. I made her pot roast on their first visit, the same way my mother had made it for family gatherings, and I watched with pride as Caleb beamed, introducing the woman he loved. Their engagement came quickly, and I threw myself into helping them plan their wedding. I hemmed dresses, arranged flowers, even made little welcome bags for out-of-town guests. It felt good to be needed again, to be woven into the fabric of Caleb's new life. When Eliza announced her pregnancy 2 years later, my heart nearly burst with joy. I pictured Sunday afternoons in the park, baking cookies with sticky little hands, reading Goodnight Moon until tiny eyelids fluttered shut. I began knitting as soon as they told me the news. Tiny booties, soft blankets, a little blue cap for cold winter days. I wanted my grandson to feel the same kind of love that had carried Caleb and me through every storm. In those early months of Eliza's pregnancy, we shared meals, doctor's appointment updates, baby shower plans. Caleb would call to tell me about the sonograms, sending blurry images that I printed and pinned on my fridge. Eliza even asked for my help setting up the nursery. Soft yellows and greens, with hand-painted animal murals on the walls. I spent hours sanding the old rocking chair from Caleb's nursery, repainting it a gentle cream color, imagining the nights Eliza would sit there, humming lullabies to her baby. For a while, it felt like everything was unfolding just as I had dreamed. I wasn't naive. I knew things would change. New babies brought sleepless nights, stress, and shifting priorities. But I believed, truly believed, that the foundation we had built would hold strong. Looking back, it's almost painful how sure I was. I had no reason to doubt my place in their new life. I had done everything a mother-in-law, could do. I gave them space. I supported without judgment. I celebrated every milestone with open arms and an open heart. I wasn't trying to intrude or control. I just wanted to be there, to love them the way I always had. That's the thing about loss. The real heartbreak doesn't usually come all at once. It sneaks in through small cracks you don't notice until the whole structure crumbles. At the time, though, I couldn't see any cracks. Only a future filled with birthday parties, holiday dinners, and baby giggles echoing through my home once more. I had built a life of love, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. And I believed, with all the hope a heart can hold, that there was still a place for me inside the walls of my son's new family. The first time I noticed something was wrong, it was so small I almost convinced myself it didn't matter. It was a Saturday afternoon in late September, and we were sitting around Caleb and Eliza's kitchen table planning the baby's shower. Eliza's best friend Jenna was there too, scrolling on her phone and tossing out ideas. I had come prepared, a little notebook filled with ideas, tips from years of helping organize parties for school events, and suggestions to make it special for Eliza. After all, it wasn't just another party to me. It was the welcoming of my grandson. I suggested a simple, cozy gathering at the community center down the street. Someplace easy for Eliza's family and Caleb's friends to get to. Someplace filled with memories of church bazaars and school bake sales. I even knew the woman who ran it and could get us a discounted rate. Eliza didn't look up from her phone. She just smirked slightly and said, almost absently, "Yeah, Margaret, that's cute, but nobody really does stuff like that anymore. We're thinking something a little more, modern." Her words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. Jenna giggled without looking up, and Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I smiled. What else could I do? And said lightly, "Of course. Whatever you two want, I just thought it might be nice." Inside, though, something stung. It wasn't the rejection of the idea. It was the way she said it. Cute. Like I was an old woman offering a typewriter to a room full of people carrying smartphones. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't want to make waves. Caleb loved her. She was carrying his child. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. Maybe she was just tired or stressed. Maybe I was old-fashioned. I stuffed the hurt down into the same little box where I kept all the other small slights life handed you. The offhand comments from teenagers. The blank stares from people who thought a retired teacher didn't have anything left to offer. The day continued, and I did what I had always done. I smiled, I nodded, I offered to help in whatever way they needed. When Eliza mentioned hiring a professional party planner instead of relying on family to help, I agreed easily, even though it twisted something sharp in my chest. On the way home that night, I replayed the afternoon in my mind, trying to smooth it over. I told myself it was just a new generation doing things differently, that it wasn't personal, that I was still loved, still wanted, still needed. But a small seed of doubt had been planted, and once it's there, it grows quietly, stubbornly, even when you try your hardest not to water it. The next few weeks brought more small moments, texts that went unanswered for days, conversations where I was talked over, corrected, or simply ignored, plans made without including me, shared on social media for everyone else to see. I kept telling myself it was normal, that they were busy, adjusting, nesting, that once the baby arrived, everything would fall into place. Still, that first little moment, that simple dismissive word, cute, stuck with me longer than it should have. It was the first time I saw the invisible line drawn between us, the first time I felt the undercurrent of something colder than exhaustion or distraction. The first time I realized I was no longer a part of their center. At best, I was a visitor. And deep down, though I refused to admit it then, I knew something precious was slipping through my fingers, something I might not be able to catch again. After the baby shower planning, I told myself it was a one-time thing. A stressful day, a tired mind, a young woman trying to navigate her new life. I had been young once, too. I understood. But the small moments didn't stop. They multiplied. Slowly, quietly, like tiny cracks in a windshield spreading outward until the whole thing threatens to shatter. It started with the visits. Before Noah was born, Caleb and Eliza used to call me every few days, sometimes just to share a funny story or ask for advice on recipes. Now, the calls grew less frequent. Sometimes they wouldn't answer at all, and when they did, Caleb's voice sounded strained, distracted. Eliza rarely came on the line. When they finally invited me over to see Noah, I was ecstatic. I baked my famous cinnamon bread, the one Caleb had loved as a boy, and wrapped it carefully in a tea towel. I even picked up a little rattle shaped like a bear, thinking it would be a sweet surprise. When I arrived, Eliza opened the door, cradling Noah against her chest. She didn't invite me in right away. She stood there for a moment, her body angled protectively, like a barrier between me and her child. I smiled and held out the bread and rattle. "Just a little something," I said, trying to keep my voice light. She took the bread without a word, didn't even glance at the rattle. Caleb appeared behind her, his smile tight and apologetic. Inside, the house was dim and quiet, as if even the air was tiptoeing around Eliza's fragile state. I washed my hands in the kitchen without being asked, sat carefully on the edge of the couch, and waited patiently for permission to hold Noah. It didn't come. Instead, Eliza fussed with Noah's blanket, fed him, burped him, and finally placed him in a bassinet by the window, all without offering him to me. I told myself she was just tired, that it wasn't about me. But I felt it in the way she avoided eye contact, the way she sighed when I asked if they needed anything, the way she seemed to breathe easier when I finally said, I should probably be going. Even the small courtesies, the things we do for one another without thinking, seemed to evaporate. When I dropped off a package of diapers a week later, I received a curt text. "Thanks, we have enough for now." When I knitted a little sweater, carefully choosing soft, washable yarn so it would be easy for Eliza to care for, I saw it shoved to the back of a closet, tags still attached. It wasn't outright hostility. It was something harder to fight. Indifference. A slow, creeping erasure of my place in their lives. Not in grand gestures, but in thousands of tiny omissions that left me feeling invisible. Once after church, I ran into an old friend at the grocery store. She asked how I was enjoying being a grandmother. I opened my mouth to answer, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say. I hadn't rocked Noah to sleep. I hadn't sung him lullabies. I hadn't been allowed to love him the way I had dreamed. I laughed it off, muttering something about how times have changed, and pushed my cart down the frozen foods aisle, blinking against the sudden sting in my eyes. The worst part wasn't the distance itself. It was that I couldn't find the edges of it, couldn't fix it, couldn't even explain it to Caleb without sounding like a petty jealous old woman? How do you tell your son that you feel erased without making him feel like he has to choose? How do you reach out to someone who sees every offer of love as an intrusion? So I did what women of my generation were taught to do. I swallowed the hurt. I smiled at the right times. I told myself it wasn't about me. I waited for the call that didn't come, waited for the invitation that never arrived, waited for a chance that slipped further away with every passing day. And as I waited, the love I had built my life around began to feel like a house, standing empty, its windows dark, its doors locked from the inside. I had spent so many years pouring love outward, into Caleb, into my students, into everyone who needed it, that I didn't know how to stop. But now, that love had nowhere to land, and without it, I was beginning to wonder who I was anymore. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that was supposed to be about family and warmth. Caleb had invited me to a small barbecue they were hosting for a few close friends and neighbors. It was meant to be casual, just burgers, lemonade, laughter under the big oak tree in their backyard. I hadn't seen Noah in nearly 3 weeks, and the invitation felt like a thin sliver of hope slicing through the heavy fog that had settled between us. I spent the morning making my famous potato salad, the same one Caleb used to beg for at every birthday party, and chose a soft, pale blue outfit I thought looked both cheerful and respectful. I even picked up a little cloth book about animals for Noah, something simple but sweet. When I arrived, I stood at the gate for a moment, taking a breath. From where I stood, I could see Eliza bustling around the patio, arranging drinks, Caleb flipping burgers at the grill, and guests laughing in the sunshine. Noah was there too, in his little bouncy chair under a canopy, kicking his tiny legs into the air. For a moment, it almost looked like the family gatherings I used to dream about. I stepped inside, smiling brightly, waving to a few familiar faces. Caleb caught my eye and gave a small, distracted wave. Eliza glanced up, nodded stiffly, and then went back to her conversation. No one else seemed to notice I had arrived. Still, I stayed positive. I placed the potato salad on the buffet table and made my way toward Noah. His little face lit up when he saw me, or maybe it was just the sunlight in his eyes, but I chose to believe it was recognition. His hands reached upward, tiny fingers opening and closing. I knelt down beside him, smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. "Hello, my sweet boy," I whispered. Instinctively, I reached out to brush a lock of hair from his forehead, a gesture as natural to me as breathing. That's when I heard it, Eliza's voice, sharp and cutting across the soft hum of laughter. "Don't touch my baby." The backyard seemed to freeze in place. Conversations faltered, heads turned, plates paused halfway to mouths. Even Caleb's hand stilled over the grill. I pulled my hand back so fast it was as if I had been burned. I stood up, forcing a smile, trying to pretend I hadn't heard her, that it was no big deal. But the blood was roaring in my ears, my cheeks burning with shame. "I was just saying hello," I said quietly, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Eliza didn't respond. She simply turned her back to me, adjusting Noah's blanket, making a show of shielding him from me as if I were some dangerous outsider rather than his grandmother. No one spoke. No one stepped in, not even Caleb. The laughter eventually resumed, but it was different now. Strained, cautious, as if everyone was relieved that the drama hadn't, escalated, but embarrassed that it had unfolded at all. I stood there for a few minutes longer, pretending to watch the kids chasing bubbles across the yard, pretending I didn't feel 1,000 invisible eyes sliding away from me. Then, without saying goodbye, I picked up my purse, walked back through the gate, and made my way to my car. I sat behind the wheel for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, trying to understand how a woman who had once imagined being the heart of her family had become a stranger in their lives. The humiliation wasn't loud. It wasn't a screaming match or a door slammed in my face. It was quieter, more suffocating. The slow erosion of dignity in front of people who barely even knew me. And somehow, that made it worse. Because it wasn't just my heart that was broken. It was my pride. I drove home in silence, the untouched cloth book resting on the passenger seat beside me, a reminder of the love I kept trying to give to people who no longer wanted it. When I got home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply placed the book on the shelf in the spare bedroom, beside the rocking chair that had once waited for a little boy who now seemed just out of reach. I sat down in that chair, rocked slowly, and realized something bitter and aching. Sometimes, the people you love the most are the ones who teach you the loneliest lessons. And I had just learned mine, under the bright blue sky, in a backyard full of strangers. After that Sunday, something inside me shifted. Not in an explosive way, but like the slow, inevitable giving way of a branch under too much weight. I knew, in a way I couldn't unknow, that I didn't belong in Caleb and Eliza's world anymore. I didn't announce it. I didn't make a scene. I simply disappeared. The next time Caleb texted, it was a group message. An update about Noah's first doctor's visit. A photo of him bundled in a little star-covered onesie, smiling that gummy, angelic smile that made my heart ache. There was no direct invitation to visit, no acknowledgement that I might want to see him myself. I typed out half a dozen responses, each more desperate than the last, before deleting them all and putting the phone face down on the kitchen table. Sometimes, silence says more than words ever could. I stopped offering to drop by. I stopped sending little gifts that would go unopened. I stopped trying to wedge myself into spaces where I was no longer welcome. In the weeks that followed, my world grew quieter. I spent my mornings tending the garden out back, pulling weeds and pruning roses with trembling hands. My afternoons stretched long and empty, punctuated only by the occasional call from old friends I found myself drifting from, too embarrassed to explain the hollow ache in my chest. The walls of my home, once warm with the buzz of imagined laughter and footsteps, now echoed. The silence became another member of the household, a constant, unwelcome companion. One Friday afternoon, a neighbor, Mrs. Green, stopped by to drop off a pie she had baked. She chatted about the upcoming community festival, about her grandchildren visiting for the summer. I smiled politely, nodded at the right times, but I could feel the strain behind my face, the way you feel when you're trying not to cry in public. When she left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the untouched pie. I realized then how different my life looked now, how small it had become. Not because I had less love to give, but because there was nowhere left to put it. Family had been the center of everything for me, the sun around which all my hopes, dreams, and sacrifices had orbited. Now, without them, I wasn't just lonely. I was adrift. One evening, I found myself pulling out old photo albums. Thick, worn books filled with fading memories. Caleb's toothless grins, his graduation, the holidays when we wore matching sweaters and laughed until we cried. I ran my fingers over the plastic sleeves, feeling the ghosts of a life I used to know. In one picture, I was kneeling beside a much younger Caleb, both of us beaming as he held up a science fair ribbon. He had looked at me like I was his whole world. I wondered when that changed, or if I had simply been replaced. A few days later, the community center sent out flyers for a Thanksgiving food drive. Normally, I would have signed up eagerly, baking pies and casseroles, filling donation boxes with canned goods. This year, I tucked the flyer in a drawer and told myself someone else could take my place. Someone needed more now. It wasn't anger that kept me away. It wasn't pride. It was something quieter, more brittle. The realization that no amount of giving could make someone want your love if they had already decided they didn't need it. I didn't call Caleb. I didn't text Eliza. I didn't offer to babysit or bring over meals. I folded myself out of their lives the way you fold a letter you know will never be sent. Carefully, painfully, and with no expectation that anyone would ever read it. Everyone around me assumed I was fine. Fine because I smiled when they asked how Caleb and Eliza were doing. Fine because I showed up to church, to the grocery store, to the library, wearing my neatest clothes and my brightest face. But inside, a part of me had quietly shattered, and no one seemed to notice. Maybe that was the final lesson. that sometimes the deepest grief isn't loud or visible. It's quiet. It's ordinary. It's the steady closing of a door you once believed would always stay open. And so, without protest, without drama, I walked away. I let them have their life, their space, their silence. But deep inside, something remained, a tiny ember, stubborn and alive even beneath the ashes. I always thought that grief came like a storm, sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. But real grief, the kind that settles into your bones, doesn't announce itself. It seeps in slowly, quietly, until one day you wake up and realize you're living in it. For me, that day came on a gray Tuesday morning. The sky outside was colorless, a heavy blanket of clouds pressing low over the town. I woke up to the hollow stillness of my house, the kind that once had been comforting but now only made the silence louder. No texts, no calls, no sound of a child's laughter echoing down the hallway. Just me, alone, surrounded by the ghosts of a life I had once dreamed would be so different. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring out the window at the brittle trees swaying in the wind. Across the street, my neighbor's grandchildren tumbled out of a minivan, shrieking with laughter as they ran up the steps. Their grandmother waved from the porch, her arms wide open, ready to scoop them up. I had to look away. It felt like pressing my hand against an open wound. Later that morning, I decided to clean out the spare bedroom, the one I had carefully prepared when Noah was born. It had been meant to be his special space at Grandma's house. A little crib by the window, a shelf filled with picture books, the soft rocking chair I had refinished with my own 2 hands. As I pulled open the door, the musty smell of disuse hit me hard. Dust floated lazily in the pale light. The room looked frozen in time, untouched since the day I set it up. I stood there for a long moment, my hand resting on the doorframe, feeling the sharp sting of failure. Slowly I moved through the room, packing away the tiny blankets, the board books, the stuffed animals that had never been hugged. I folded everything carefully, as if the love stitched into those objects could somehow be preserved, even if it had nowhere to go. When I reached the rocking chair, I hesitated. I sat down heavily, the wood creaking under me. For a long while I just rocked, back and forth, the same motion that had once soothed Caleb after nightmares, after skinned knees, after heartbreaks. The same motion I had dreamed of offering to Noah, but there was no child to hold, no tiny voice calling for Grandma, no future visits marked on a calendar, just the sound of the chair creaking and the steady drip of tears that I didn't even realize had started to fall. I wept that day, really wept, for the first time in years, not just for Noah, not just for Caleb, but for every piece of myself that had been built around the idea of family, of connection, of being needed, and for the brutal realization that love, no matter how freely given, was not always enough. Later that evening, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and old memories. The sun set without ceremony, the sky bleeding into deep shades of blue and black. I watched as the porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood, little islands of warmth in the gathering dark. I wondered if anyone could see me sitting there. I wondered if anyone even thought to look. The loneliness that settled over me wasn't angry or bitter. It was simply there, a fact as solid as the ground under my feet. I realized then that I wasn't just mourning the loss of a relationship. I was mourning a whole imagined future. Birthday parties and Christmas mornings, school recitals and whispered secrets, a lifetime of ordinary moments that would now happen without me. Grief, I learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet acceptance that no one is coming, that the phone will stay silent, that the chair will stay empty, that the life you thought you were building has crumbled quietly around you while you were still holding the blueprints. That night, as I turned off the porch light and locked the door behind me, I realized I had reached the bottom, not because I'd lost everything, but because I no longer knew how to hope for anything different. And yet, Somewhere deep in the darkness, a tiny, stubborn ember still glowed, a whisper of something not yet broken, a promise maybe that even after the worst nights, the sun would rise again. I just didn't know how or when that sunrise would come. A week after that hollow Tuesday, I found myself cleaning the attic, not out of energy but desperation. I needed something to do, something to fill the endless, aching hours that stretched before me like a road to nowhere. The attic smelled of old wood and dust, the air thick and still. I opened the small window at the far end, letting in a weak shaft of sunlight that illuminated floating specks of dust, swirling like tiny ghosts. Around me were the artifacts of a life once lived with purpose. Richard's old fishing rods, Caleb's elementary school art projects, boxes of lesson plans from my teaching days. I knelt down beside one battered trunk, one I hadn't opened in years, and popped the rusty latches. Inside were old photo albums, yellowing letters, and loose photographs curled at the edges with time. I ran my hand over them carefully, each touch sending a pang through my chest. At the very bottom of the trunk, I found a worn, leather-bound journal. It wasn't mine. I knew that immediately. I recognized the careful handwriting on the first page. It was Caleb's, a journal he had kept in high school, probably forgotten when he left for college. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the pages, a part of me unsure if I had the right to read it. But something, a deep, aching need to feel closer to him, pushed me forward. I sat down on the wooden floor, the journal balanced on my knees, and began to read. The entries were scattered, teenage thoughts about homework and crushes and dreams too big to fit inside a small town. But then, tucked between doodles of spaceships and song lyrics, I found an entry dated the day after Caleb's 18th birthday. Mom is my hero. She's always been the one person who never gave up on me. Even when I messed up, even when I was angry or stupid or selfish, she stayed. I want to make her proud. I want to build a life that she knows she helped create. If I ever have kids, I hope they love me even half as much as I love her. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I pressed the journal to my chest and rocked slightly, the same motion I had used in the rocking chair just days earlier. It felt like a message, not from the Caleb I knew now, but from the boy he had been. The boy who had once thought I hung the moon. Somewhere along the way, life had shifted. Pressures, relationships, new loyalties. But the foundation between us hadn't been built on quicksand. It had been real, solid, deep. Maybe he had forgotten for a while. Maybe Eliza's fears and insecurities had built walls between us that I didn't know how to scale. But this journal, these words, were proof that the love I gave had mattered. Still mattered. That I wasn't just some background figure or meddlesome in-law. I was part of Caleb's story. Not just in the past, but still quietly woven into the fabric of who he was. I closed the journal gently and set it aside. I stayed there for a while, seated cross-legged on the dusty floor, letting the tears come and go like waves. The hurt didn't vanish. The loneliness didn't disappear. But something inside me shifted again. Not the breaking of more pieces, but the slow gathering of the ones that remained. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. I had built a life out of love, patience, and quiet resilience. And no one, not even unintentionally, could take that away from me. The discovery wasn't just about finding Caleb's journal. It was about finding myself again, buried under months of pain and self-doubt. I was still here, still whole, even in the broken places, still capable of love, whether or not it was recognized or returned. As I closed the trunk and carried the journal carefully downstairs, I realized that healing wouldn't come from being invited back into someone else's life. It would come from reclaiming my own. And maybe, just maybe, the love I had built would find its way back to me. In time, in its own imperfect human way. The morning after I found Caleb's journal, the world looked just a little bit different. It wasn't that everything was suddenly bright or easy. The distance between us still existed, the silence still hovered, but there was a shift inside me, A subtle but profound awakening. For the first time in months, I didn't start my day waiting for a phone call that wouldn't come. I didn't refresh my messages or check my social media notifications, hoping for a crumb of connection. Instead, I brewed myself a strong cup of coffee, stepped onto the front porch, and simply stood there, watching the sun rise slowly over the tops of the trees. The air was cool and sharp with the scent of dew. Birds flitted from branch to branch, unconcerned by human worries. The world kept moving, and so would I. I thought back to that journal entry, Caleb's young, unguarded love for me, and it planted a new kind of seed in my heart. Not a seed of bitterness, not a seed of anger, but a seed of remembrance. I remembered who I was before the rejection, before the humiliation, before the months of shrinking myself smaller and smaller to fit into spaces that no longer welcomed me. I had been a mother who sacrificed without complaint, a teacher who stayed late to help students others had written off, a friend who showed up when others didn't, a woman who built a life not from noise and spectacle, but from steadfast love. That hadn't changed. I hadn't stopped being that woman just because others stopped noticing. Standing there on the porch, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not let this season of sadness define the rest of my life. I would not keep sitting in empty rooms, mourning people who had chosen distance. I would not let the coldness of others turn my heart hard or small. Instead, I would live, truly live, not in spite of my heartbreak, but because of it. Because it reminded me that I still had so much love left to give. Not everyone would want it. Not everyone would understand it. But somewhere, someone would. I started small. That afternoon, I signed up to volunteer at the local children's library for Saturday story hours. Wasn't much, just an hour a week reading picture books to wiggly toddlers, but it felt like placing a brick back into the foundation of the life I wanted to rebuild. I pulled out old recipes I hadn't touched in years and baked pies for the church's community supper, leaving them anonymously with a note that said, "Baked with love." I called an old friend I hadn't spoken to since Richard's funeral, a woman who had once been my closest confidant but whom I had drifted away from in the chaos of raising Caleb. She answered on the first ring, and by the end of the call, we were laughing like teenagers. I even started walking again, not hurried, not driven, but simply to feel the rhythm of my feet on the ground, the air filling my lungs, the life still pulsing in my veins. Each small act was like lighting a candle in a dark room. At first, the darkness still pressed heavily against me, but slowly, steadily, the light began to grow. There were setbacks, of course. Days when the loneliness crept back in, whispering lies about worthlessness and failure. But now, I had a defense. The memory of Caleb's words, the truth that love given, real love, is never wasted. I began to see myself not as a woman discarded, but as a woman refined. Tested, yes. Wounded, certainly. But not defeated. Life would not look the way I had planned. The picture in my mind, of rocking chairs and shared holidays and sticky toddler kisses, might never come to pass. But there were still other pictures waiting to be painted. New dreams I had yet to dream. New joys I had yet to discover. And as I stood one evening by the window, watching the stars prick through the velvet sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Not the desperate pleading kind that waits for others to come back, but the quiet, powerful kind that grows from within. The kind that says, even here, even now, your story is not over. It was only the beginning. Change didn't happen all at once. It didn't burst into my life like a dramatic sunrise or crash over me like a tidal wave. Instead, it slipped in quietly, deliberate and steady, like the slow turning of a tide. After that morning of quiet awakening, I didn't make declarations. I didn't announce to anyone that I was moving on or starting over. I simply began, quietly, silently, for myself. I started with my home, the place that had become a museum of hopes deferred. I went room by room, not to erase the memories, but to make space for new ones. In the spare bedroom where the crib had once stood, I replaced it with a cozy reading nook. I moved in a soft armchair, added a little side table, and stacked it high with novels and poetry books I had always meant to read. I didn't pack the baby blankets away with bitterness. Instead, I folded them carefully, placed them in a cedar chest, and tucked them away like treasures. Memories of love offered without regret. In the garden, I tore up the wilting marigolds that had been left to rot and planted bright, stubborn daisies. They weren't fancy, they didn't require much, but they turned their faces to the sun without apology, and I decided I wanted to be a little bit like them. At the library, I didn't just volunteer for story hour. I signed up to help with the after-school tutoring program. I sat with children who struggled to read, who twisted their little fingers in their shirts when they stumbled over words. I knew that look, the look of someone trying their best and feeling small. So I praised them fiercely for every success, no matter how tiny. It felt good. It felt right. It felt like pouring water back into the dry places of my heart. Financially, I made changes too, ones no one would see but me. I met quietly with my banker, a kind woman named Miss Harper who wore bright scarves and spoke with gentle firmness. We went over my accounts, my will, my emergency funds. I moved some investments, updated my beneficiaries. Not out of spite, not to punish Caleb or Eliza, but to ensure that if anything happened to me, the life I had built with such care would go where it could do the most good, where it would be appreciated and honored. I also made a secret plan to take a trip, something I hadn't done for myself in decades. There was a little coastal town in Maine I had once read about, a place where the harbor gleamed silver at sunset and the air smelled like salt and wild roses. I booked a modest room at a bed and breakfast run by an elderly couple who raised golden retrievers and baked fresh bread every morning. The reservation was for 3 months out, enough time to save, to prepare, to imagine myself stepping into a place where no one knew me as Caleb's mother or Eliza's unwanted guest. Just Margaret. Just a woman with a suitcase full of dreams she wasn't ready to give up on. I didn't tell anyone. Not my neighbors. Not the ladies from church. Not even my old friend Patty, who called once a week now, her laughter bright and easy. This was for me. Only me. It felt powerful. This quiet reclaiming. Not loud, not flashy, but real, solid, like laying bricks under my own feet, one careful step at a time. Every small decision I made, every gentle boundary I set, every seed I planted was a whisper to myself. You are still here. You are still worthy. You are still enough. The people who had pulled away didn't notice the changes. They didn't see the rooms shift or the bank accounts update or the garden bloom, but I did. And more importantly, I began to feel it. The woman who had once sat rocking in an empty nursery, hollowed out by loss, was slowly being rebuilt, not into who she used to be, but into someone even stronger. I didn't know what the future would bring. Maybe Caleb and Eliza would reach out again. Maybe they wouldn't. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like my whole life was tied to their choices. I was building something steadier, something no one could take from me again. I was building myself. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't like they woke up one morning and suddenly realized what they had lost. It was slower, more gradual, like a tide pulling away, leaving them standing alone on the shore. At first, I doubted they even noticed my absence. After all, I had left so quietly, without confrontation or accusation. Just a slow, steady disappearance, like a candle burning itself out in an empty room. But little signs began to show. It started with Caleb. One Saturday afternoon, as I was helping organize books at the library, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I wiped my hands on my jeans and pulled it out, expecting a reminder from Patty or a message from the community center. Instead, it was Caleb. Just a simple text. "Hey, Mom, how are you?" I stared at it for a long time, heart thudding in my chest. Not because he was reaching out. but because for the first time I didn't feel an immediate, desperate need to reply. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, I just didn't feel that aching urgency to prove I was still here, still waiting, still ready to be loved, if only they remembered. Instead, I smiled gently to myself and slid the phone back into my pocket. I finished shelving the books. I chatted with a shy little boy about dinosaurs. I laughed with the librarian about the upcoming fall festival. Only after the day was done, after I had lived a full and satisfying afternoon without the need for their approval, did I text back, "I'm doing well, Caleb. Hope you're all doing okay, too." No eager explanation, no eager promises to visit, just calm, steady kindness. The kind that doesn't beg, but offers. In the days that followed, there were more small ripples. A photo Caleb posted on social media, Noah's first steps, with a caption that mentioned how quickly time was passing. No gushing from family in the comments. No excited celebration from a grandmother who would have once dropped everything to be there. Another text from Caleb, "Noah's birthday party next month. Hope you can come." It was polite. It was careful. But it didn't carry the same assumption that I would automatically show up. No questions asked. For the first time, they were reaching out, not from a place of authority or expectation, but from something closer to longing. I could feel it even through the thin veil of their careful words. The silence I had left behind was louder than they expected. They had imagined, perhaps, that I would always be there, waiting in the wings, ready to step in whenever needed, forgiving every slight, absorbing every wound without question. But love isn't a bottomless well you can draw from forever without ever filling it back up. My quiet withdrawal had revealed something uncomfortable. I was not infinite. My patience was deep, but not endless. My heart was open, but not unbreakable. And somewhere deep down, I think they realized it. The power had begun to shift. Not through confrontation or demands, but through the quiet reclaiming of my own worth. I didn't chase. I didn't beg. I didn't try to force my way back into their lives. I simply lived my own life, fully and unapologetically. And in doing so, I became a presence they could feel even more in my absence than they had when I was quietly standing in the corners of their gatherings, waiting to be acknowledged. The realization gave me a strange kind of peace. I didn't need them to fall at my feet, begging for forgiveness. I didn't need grand gestures or dramatic apologies. All I needed was the knowledge that I had taken back my own power, the power to love myself enough not to beg for scraps of affection. The next time Caleb texted, asking if I could babysit Noah for a few hours, I smiled and replied, "I have plans that day, but thank you for thinking of me. Maybe another time." It wasn't said with malice. It wasn't punishment. It was simply a statement of fact. My life was full now. Not because they had filled it, but because I had. And slowly, quietly, they were beginning to realize that if they wanted me in their lives, they would have to meet me halfway. Not with demands or guilt, but with respect. The ground beneath us had shifted, not with an earthquake, but with a steady, undeniable tilt. And for the first time in a long time, I was standing firmly on my own 2 feet. It happened quietly, fitting for the way everything else had unfolded. No big scene, no shouting match, no dramatic slamming of doors. Just a soft conversation on a cool Saturday morning with the leaves beginning to turn gold and crimson outside the windows. Caleb had invited me to brunch. It was the first real invitation, not a group text, not an obligation, but a personal, direct message. "Mom, would you like to come over? Just us. We'd love to have you." I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because for once I needed to make sure I was showing up for the right reasons. Not to fix things, not to win them back, but to simply stand in my own truth. I agreed, but I set the terms quietly in my own mind. If I was going to walk back into their lives, it would be as an equal, not as a shadow. When I arrived, Caleb met me at the door. He looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in weight. Like life had pressed harder on his shoulders since the last time we were close. Eliza was there too, standing a little stiffly by the kitchen counter, her hands nervously wiping at a non-existent stain on a dish towel. Noah, now a walking, babbling toddler, sat in his high chair, smearing applesauce across his tray with joyful abandon. The house felt different. Not hostile, just uncertain. We made small talk for a while, about the weather, about Noah's new words, about nothing that mattered. I sipped my coffee and listened, offering small smiles, not trying to force anything. Finally, Caleb cleared his throat. He shifted in his chair, glanced at Eliza, then back at me. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "I know things have been different. Hard." I nodded, letting him continue. "I guess we didn't realize how much we were pushing you away," he said, fumbling for the right words. "We were so overwhelmed, we didn't mean to make you feel unwanted." Eliza looked up then, her eyes shiny but determined. "I was scared," she said simply, "of messing up, of not being enough. I thought if I controlled everything, I could be a good mom. I didn't realize I was hurting the people who wanted to love him, too." There was a long silence, the kind that used to make me rush in to smooth things over, to make it easier for everyone else. But I didn't rush this time. I let the silence stretch, let them sit in it, feel it, and when I spoke, it wasn't with anger or resentment. It was with clarity. "I never needed to be in control," I said softly. "I only ever wanted to love him, to love all of you. But love isn't something you should have to fight your way into." Eliza's face crumpled slightly, and she nodded, blinking fast. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands around my mug. "I will always love you, and I will always love Noah. But I can't keep chasing a place in your lives. I have a life too, one that's full and good and built with a lot of love and care." Another beat of silence, heavy but not cruel. Caleb reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "I know, Mom," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I see that now, and I don't want to take you for granted again." I squeezed his hand once, a brief, firm squeeze, before pulling back gently. "I'm here," I said, "but I won't force myself into places I'm not welcomed." There it was, my truth. Not delivered with bitterness, not used as a weapon, just placed on the table between us, simple and undeniable. Eliza wiped her eyes and gave a small, real smile. "I want you here," she whispered. "I'm sorry it took me so long to say it." And for the first time in a long, long time, I believed her. The conversation moved forward slowly after that, not a floodgate bursting open, but the careful rebuilding of a bridge, plank by plank. They didn't grovel, I didn't demand. We simply sat together, three flawed, hurting people who had finally found the courage to meet each other honestly. And Noah, in his oblivious, beautiful innocence, flung applesauce onto Caleb's shirt and laughed, a bright, ringing sound that made all of us join in. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. And sometimes, real is better than perfect. In the weeks following that brunch, life didn't flip overnight into some glossy magazine version of family bliss. There were still awkward moments, still long pauses when the past lingered too heavily between us. But there was effort, there was honesty, there was space for something real to grow. And then the twist I never expected arrived in the smallest, most unexpected way. It was Noah who delivered it. One bright Saturday morning, Caleb and Eliza invited me over again, this time to spend some time with Noah while they ran a few errands. It wasn't framed as babysitting. It wasn't phrased as doing them a favor. It was an invitation, an open door I could choose to walk through on my own terms. I said yes. When I arrived, Noah's whole face lit up. He squealed, a sound so full of pure joy it squeezed my heart. Without hesitation, he ran toward me on his wobbly little legs, arms outstretched. And this time, no one pulled him back. I scooped him up, breathing in the sweet scent of toddler shampoo and crushed crackers, and he nestled into my shoulder like he had always belonged there. It was a small thing, really, a child's simple trust, a moment of innocent love, but for me, it was everything. We spent the morning playing with blocks, reading picture books, and exploring the backyard. Noah babbled in his own secret language, laughing at the silly faces I made, handing me toy after toy with the solemn seriousness only toddlers can have. At one point, while he sat on my lap flipping through a book, he pointed to the little bear knitted into the corner of the blanket I had made before he was born, the one Eliza had once stuffed into the back of a closet. He patted it, then patted my chest, his face serious. "Mine," he said with a grin, tugging at my sweater. Tears stung the back of my eyes, but I blinked them away and kissed the top of his head. "Yes, little one," I whispered, "always yours." Later, when Caleb and Eliza returned, they found us sitting together on the porch swing, Noah curled against me, fast asleep. Eliza stood for a long moment in the doorway, watching us. There was no tension in her face now, only a kind of soft, vulnerable wonder. "I found that old blanket you made," she said quietly. "It's the only thing he won't sleep without now." I looked up at her, feeling the full weight of what she was trying to say without needing to spell it out. Love, real love, leaves a mark, even when unrecognized at first. It weaves itself into the fabric of life in ways that can't always be seen right away but are no less powerful for their invisibility. That silly little bear in the corner of a handmade blanket had done what years of trying had not. It had built a bridge back into my grandson's heart, into my son's home, into a family I thought I had lost. And the best part? I hadn't had to force it. I hadn't had to fight for it. It had happened naturally, in its own time, just as love always should. Later, as I sat in my car ready to leave, Caleb leaned down at the window, a shy smile playing on his lips. "Thank you, Mom," he said simply. "Not for babysitting, not for showing up, but for everything." I nodded, a lump rising in my throat, but I didn't cry. I didn't need to. This was justice. Not the courtroom kind, not revenge or triumph, but the quiet, soul-deep justice of knowing that what you gave with love had never really been wasted. It had simply taken time to find its way home. The victory wasn't loud or public, no big speeches, no grand apologies shouted from rooftops. It was in the tiny fingers clutching my sweater, the soft breath of a sleeping child against my skin, the unspoken acknowledgement between a mother and her son. It was in the simple, beautiful truth. Love, when it's real, always finds a way. After that morning, with Noah asleep in my arms, something shifted. Not just inside me, but inside all of us. It wasn't sudden or overwhelming. It didn't come with a flood of apologies or grand declarations. It came in small, cautious gestures, tentative steps forward, little cracks of light breaking through walls that had been built too high for too long. Eliza reached out first, in a way that surprised me. One Wednesday afternoon, while I was tending my garden, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her, simple and direct. "Would you like to come over for dinner next week? Noah's been asking for you." I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the bittersweet tangle of emotions rise. Not long ago, I would have dropped everything, canceled plans, and rushed to say yes, desperate for any invitation. But now, I paused, gave myself space to think. I realized that my answer didn't have to come from fear of being forgotten or left out. It could come from choice, from strength. I smiled softly and typed back, "I'd love to. Thank you for thinking of me." The night of the dinner, I pulled into their driveway with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't stepping back into their lives as someone begging for scraps of affection. I was stepping in as myself, whole, strong, enough. Eliza greeted me at the door with Noah balanced on her hip. He squealed when he saw me, reaching out with both chubby hands, and Eliza didn't hesitate this time. She passed him to me easily, naturally, a silent gesture more powerful than any apology. Dinner was simple. Spaghetti, salad, garlic bread, but it felt monumental. We sat together around the table, passing dishes, sharing stories. Caleb asked me about my volunteer work at the library. Eliza asked for my advice about a craft project for Noah's preschool class. There was a softness to the evening, a tentative but genuine warmth. The tension that had once buzzed under every interaction was gone, replaced by something slower, more careful, but real. After dinner, as Caleb cleaned up the dishes and Noah toddled around the living room stacking blocks, Eliza sat beside me on the couch. For a long moment, she said nothing, just watching Noah with a faraway look in her eyes. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't know how to share him," she said quietly. "I was scared. I thought if I let anyone else in too close, I'd lose my place." I listened, letting her speak without rushing to fill the silence. "But now," she continued, her voice cracking slightly, "I see that it's not about losing him. It's about giving him more love, more people to hold him up. And I want that. I want you to be part of his life, if you still want to be." Her words weren't perfect. They didn't erase the hurt or undo the months of distance. But they were honest. And sometimes, honesty matters more than perfection. I reached out and placed my hand lightly over hers. "I never needed to take anything from you," I said softly. "I only ever wanted to add to his life and yours." She squeezed my hand, blinking quickly, and for the first time I saw her not as the gatekeeper of my grandson, but as another woman trying to navigate the terrifying, beautiful, exhausting world of motherhood. It wasn't about choosing sides. It never had been. It was about building something together, brick by careful brick. Later that night, as I drove home under a sky full of stars, I realized something important. I wasn't dependent on their approval anymore. I wasn't waiting, breathless, for every text or invitation. I wasn't afraid of being alone. But now, if they reached out, if they made space for me, it was a gift I could accept freely, not a lifeline I clung to out of desperation. The reconnection was happening, slow, fragile, imperfect, and for the first time it was happening on ground we had built together, not ground I had begged to stand on. I had found peace within myself first. Everything else was simply a blessing on top. The first snow of the season fell on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I sat by the window, wrapped in a soft, worn shawl, cradling a cup of tea between my hands. Outside, the world transformed. The trees dressed in shimmering white, the streets softened under a thick, glowing blanket. The flakes drifted down in lazy spirals, like tiny notes from heaven, blanketing everything in stillness and grace. It had been nearly a year since the day Eliza pulled Noah away from me and told me not to touch him. Nearly a year since I had walked away without looking back, my heart quietly breaking inside my chest. So much had changed since then, not with grand, sweeping gestures, but in small, quiet ways that only I could fully feel. I thought about that first terrible silence, those long, empty days when I questioned my worth, my place, even my identity. I thought about the attic, the dusty journal, the words from a younger Caleb that reached across time and pulled me back to myself. Most of all, I thought about the decision I had made, not to chase, not to beg, not to plead my case, but to rebuild my life with quiet strength, with dignity, with love that asked for nothing in return. And because of that choice, life had found its way back to me. Not the exact life I had imagined, not a perfect one, but a life richer, deeper, and more rooted in truth. Noah was part of my life again now, not every day, not every holiday, but enough. Enough to hear his giggles as he climbed into my lap with a new book, enough to feel his tiny arms wrap around my neck in fierce, unconditional hugs. Caleb and I were rebuilding too, not rushing, not pretending the past hadn't hurt, but walking forward with careful, deliberate steps, meeting each other honestly at every turn. Even Eliza, once the barrier I could not break through, was becoming something else entirely. A woman who had grown in her own way, learning to share the love she once hoarded out of fear. And me? I had changed too. In ways that no one could see just by looking, in ways that mattered most. I no longer measured my worth by how often my phone rang or how many chairs I filled at a holiday table. I no longer begged for scraps of affection or twisted myself to fit into spaces where I was unwelcome. I lived. I loved. I built a life that was beautiful, whether or not anyone else chose to join me. And somehow, by letting go, I had made space for them to come back. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That was the difference. That was the lesson. Love that is real cannot be forced. It cannot be manipulated or demanded. It must be offered freely and accepted freely, or not at all. As the snow piled against the windowsill, I rose and pulled the little cedar chest from under the couch. Inside, still perfectly folded, were the tiny baby blankets I had made before Noah was born. I lifted one, soft pale blue with a knitted bear tucked into the corner, and unfolded it carefully. Smiling, I draped it over the back of the couch, not as a shrine to what I had lost, but as a quiet symbol of what I had reclaimed. The ability to love, the courage to let go, the strength to stand even when it felt like the ground had crumbled beneath me. I placed my cup down, pulled the shawl tighter around my shoulders, and stepped onto the porch. The world was silent except for the soft hush of falling snow. The trees stood bare and proud against the white sky. The world was stripped down, simple and raw, and still achingly beautiful. I closed my eyes and breathed in the crisp, cold air, feeling it fill my lungs and clear my mind. Whatever tomorrow brought, more connection, more distance, more unexpected twists, I knew I would meet it with an open heart and steady hands. Because I had walked through heartbreak and found something better waiting on the other side. Not certainty, not perfection, but peace. And sometimes, peace is the most beautiful ending of all.